1945. Speaking to a German woman could end an American soldier's career. 1950. Over 20,000 American soldiers had married German women and brought them home. How did the enemy become the bride? How did a military order crumble under the weight of love? The answer lies in the ruins of post-war Germany, where hearts defied nations. For the German women, the choice was impossible. To fall in love with an American soldier meant betrayal in the eyes of their neighbors. They were called Ami Liebchen, Yankee sweethearts, a slur spat with venom. Some had their hair cut in the streets. Others were shunned by their own families. But hunger and loneliness make strange bedfellows. And in the ruins of the Third Reich, where hope was scarce, love, even forbidden love, became a lifeline. May the 12th, 1945. Just 4 days after victory in Europe, General Dwight D. Eisenhower issued General Order No. 1 to every American serviceman in occupied Germany. The language was blunt, the intent unmistakable. Fraternization with German nationals is strictly forbidden. Violators will face military justice. The order covered everything speaking beyond official business, sharing meals, attending social gatherings, and certainly any romantic involvement. The penalty was severe. Court-martial, reduction in rank, dishonorable discharge, a stain that would follow a man for life. Posters appeared overnight in barracks across the American occupation zone. Bold letters declared, "Don't fraternize." Illustrations showed stern-faced soldiers turning away from German civilians. Officers gathered their men and delivered the message with iron clarity. These people were the enemy yesterday. They remain the enemy today. You will not associate with them. You will not trust them. You will maintain discipline. The assembled soldiers nodded, faces blank, but beneath the surface, questions stirred. How long could a man occupy a country and remain untouched by its people? The military police took the order seriously. They patrolled the streets of Frankfurt, Munich, Berlin, Nuremberg, watching for violations. Any soldier caught laughing with a German woman, sharing a cigarette, lingering too long in conversation, risked being reported. Notebooks filled with names. Some men were demoted, others faced formal charges. The message was clear. The United States Army would tolerate no weakness, no sentimentality, no blurring of the line between victor and vanquished. Yet, even as the ink dried on Eisenhower's order, the first cracks appeared. Germany in May 1945 was a landscape of contradictions. Cities lay in ruins, their streets choked with rubble, their buildings hollowed by fire. Refugees wandered with blank eyes, clutching bundles of belongings. Children begged for chocolate. Women queued for hours outside aid stations, hoping for bread, for milk, for anything. Amid this devastation, American soldiers were stationed not as distant conquerors, but as administrators, rebuilding what war had destroyed. They manned occupation offices, distributed food rations, supervised reconstruction. They lived and worked in close quarters with the very people they had been ordered to avoid. In Berlin, a young soldier named Robert found himself assigned to a requisitioned office building where German clerks and typists worked under American supervision. He was told not to speak to them beyond giving orders. But how could he run an office in silence? A German secretary named Ilse handled correspondence, filing, translations. She was 24, thin from years of rationing, her face pale but dignified. The first time Robert asked her to type a memo, she responded in careful, halting English. He nodded curtly and walked away, following the rules. But the next day, when she handed him the completed work, their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary. Neither spoke. Neither had to. In Munich, an American medic named Frank worked in a makeshift clinic treating displaced persons. A German nurse named Helga assisted him, her English limited, her medical training evident in the deft way she bandaged wounds and administered injections. They communicated with gestures, broken phrases, the universal language of caregiving. One evening, after a long shift, Frank offered her a piece of bread from his ration pack. She hesitated, glancing toward the door where a military policeman stood smoking. Frank set the bread on the table between them and walked away. When he returned, it was gone. No words were exchanged. But a boundary had been crossed. The order was clear. But the reality of occupation was messy, human, unpredictable. Soldiers were young men far from home, lonely, longing for connection. German women were survivors in a shattered land, hungry, desperate, searching for any thread of normalcy. When those threads began to weave together, no military order could stop them. The forbidden had already begun. The rules said one thing. The streets of occupied Germany whispered another. In the spring and summer of 1945, American forces controlled vast swaths of a broken nation. Offices needed staffing, infrastructure required rebuilding, communications demanded translators. The occupation could not function without German labor, and so thousands of German civilians found themselves working alongside the very soldiers ordered not to speak to them. The contradiction was built into the system from the start. In Frankfurt, the Americans requisitioned the IG Farben building, one of the few structures still standing amid the ruins. Inside, German secretaries typed requisition forms, filed reports, answered telephones. American officers moved through the halls, issuing orders, reviewing documents. The work was bureaucratic, tedious, essential, and it required conversation. A captain might ask a typist to prepare a letter. She would ask for clarification. He would explain. Their exchange was professional, necessary, permitted under the rules. But when he paused to compliment her English, when she smiled in return, when he lingered a moment too long at her desk, the line blurred. A soldier named John worked in the motor pool in Stuttgart, managing vehicle repairs. A young German woman named Greta was assigned to the clerical section, tracking parts and schedules. She spoke better English than most, having studied it before the war. John needed her help to decipher shipping manifests written in German. She needed his signature to authorize requisitions. They met daily over paperwork, their conversations clipped and functional at first. But over weeks, the exchanges grew longer. John asked where she had learned English. Greta mentioned a teacher in school before everything collapsed. He asked if her family was safe. She hesitated, then said her father had not returned from the Eastern Front. John nodded quietly. The next day, he brought her an extra coffee from the mess hall. She accepted it without a word. In Berlin, the devastation was more complete than anywhere else. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to skeletal frames. Women, many of them widows, picked through rubble searching for anything salvageable: bricks, wood, scraps of metal. American soldiers watched them from checkpoints, these silent figures moving like ghosts through the ruins. Some soldiers looked away, unwilling to confront the human cost of total war. Others felt something stir, pity, guilt, a recognition that war did not distinguish between soldiers and civilians in its final reckoning. A lieutenant named Paul was assigned to oversee reconstruction efforts in the Charlottenburg district. He worked with a German civil engineer named Anneliese, one of the few women in her field. She had survived the bombing, the Soviet assault, the chaos of collapse. Now she stood beside American officers, pointing to blueprints, explaining which buildings could be salvaged, which had to be demolished. Paul admired her precision, her refusal to be diminished by circumstance. They spoke only of work, foundations, and load-bearing walls, water lines and electrical grids. But during a site inspection one afternoon, Anneliese slipped on loose rubble. Paul caught her arm, steadying her. Their eyes met. She murmured a thank you in German. He nodded and released her. Neither mentioned it again. But something had shifted. Not all encounters were so restrained. In the shadows of occupation, away from the eyes of military police, soldiers found their way to places the rules could not reach. Small cafes opened in basements, serving watered-down beer and ersatz coffee. German women, desperate for income, worked as waitresses, bartenders, companions. Some soldiers went seeking distraction, a drink, a conversation, an escape from the monotony of garrison duty. They found women who spoke of life before the war, of bombed-out homes, of brothers and fathers lost. The soldiers listened, their initial suspicion softening into something more complex. A sergeant named Michael frequented a cafe near the American sector boundary in Munich. The owner was an older woman who had lost her husband in the war. Her daughter, Liesel, helped serve drinks. She was 22, quiet, watchful. Michael came in once, then twice, then every other night. He told himself he went for the beer, weak as it was. But he knew better. Liesel had a way of looking at him that made him feel seen, not as a conqueror, not as an occupier, but as a man far from home. They spoke little at first. She knew only fragments of English. He knew no German. But gradually, haltingly, they found ways to communicate. He taught her a few words. She corrected his terrible pronunciation. They laughed quietly in the dim light of the cafe, aware that what they were doing carried risk. The military police could not be everywhere. Soldiers grew bolder. Women, worn down by years of survival, allowed themselves moments of connection. Across occupied Germany, in 1,000 small ways, the fraternization band began to fracture, and no one yet understood how completely it would fall apart. But for every quiet conversation, for every shared cigarette or lingering glance, there was a price to pay, and the German women paid it first. In the eyes of many Germans, a woman who associated with American soldiers was a traitor. The word Ami Liebchen spread through the rubble-strewn streets like poison. Yankee sweetheart. It was not said with affection. It was spat, hissed, carved into reputations with the same brutality that had marked the war itself. Women seen laughing with American soldiers, accepting food, walking side by side, found themselves targets of communal rage. The anger was complex, rooted in shame, defeat, hunger, and the humiliation of occupation. Someone had to be blamed, and the women who crossed the line became the scapegoats. In Nuremberg, a young woman named Hannah worked as a translator for the American military government. She was competent, educated, fluent in English. Her job required daily interaction with American officers. She was polite, professional, careful. But rumors spread anyway. Neighbors whispered that she smiled too much, that she lingered too long in conversation, that she was too comfortable in the presence of the enemy. One morning she found the word "Hure" painted across her apartment door. Whore, she scrubbed it off, hands trembling, but the stain remained, not on the wood, but on her name. In Stuttgart, a woman named Margaret accepted a chocolate bar from an American soldier who had been kind to her son, a hungry boy of 7. She thought nothing of it, a small gesture, a moment of mercy. But a neighbor saw. Within days, Margaret found herself shunned at the breadline, women turning their backs, refusing to stand near her. Someone spat at her feet. When she tried to explain, no one listened. In a world where food was scarce and survival uncertain, any advantage, even kindness from an occupier, was seen as betrayal. The punishments grew harsher. In some towns, women accused of fraternizing had their heads shaved in public. It was a ritual of humiliation, echoing what had been done to collaborators in France and Belgium. The women were dragged into town squares, held down while neighbors took scissors, then razors, stripping away their hair as crowds jeered. The act was meant to mark them, to brand them as outcasts. Some women wept, others stared ahead in stony silence, refusing to give their tormentors the satisfaction of tears. The American soldiers, when they heard of these incidents, were horrified, but they were also powerless to stop them. What happened within German communities was beyond their jurisdiction. For the women, the choice became impossible. To speak to an American soldier meant risking everything: reputation, family, safety. But the alternative was silence, isolation, slow starvation in a country that had nothing left to offer. Some women retreated, accepting the unspoken rules, keeping their distance. Others, driven by hunger, loneliness, or simply the human need for connection, took the risk. A woman named Frida worked in a laundry facility that serviced the American barracks. She was 28, a war widow, her husband killed on the Eastern Front. She had no family left, no resources, no prospects. The job at the laundry was all that stood between her and destitution. An American sergeant named Tom brought his uniforms in weekly. He was polite, respectful, never demanding. One week he noticed bruises on her arms. He asked if she was all right. She lied, said she had fallen. He did not press. But the next week he brought her a small bag of coffee, real coffee, a luxury she had not tasted in years. She accepted it, knowing what it might cost her. 2 days later, a group of women confronted her outside the laundry. They called her Ami Liebchen. They told her she was no longer welcome in their community. Frida stood silent, clutching the bag of coffee, her face pale. She did not defend herself. What could she say? That she was hungry? That kindness, even from the enemy, felt like a lifeline. No explanation would satisfy them. The soldiers, too, faced consequences, though theirs came in different forms. A private named Edward was caught by military police sharing a meal with a German woman in a quiet corner of a bombed-out cafe. He was hauled before his commanding officer, reprimanded, reduced in rank. His pay was docked, his record was marked. The woman, whose name he never even learned, disappeared. He never saw her again. The punishment was meant to serve as a warning, but it did not stop him from thinking about her, wondering if she was safe, if she had enough to eat, if she regretted that brief, fragile moment of connection. The fraternization ban had created a world of impossible choices. Love, or even the possibility of love, had become an act of defiance. And defiance in a conquered land carried a weight that no order, no threat, no punishment could fully contain. Despite the risks, the threats, and the shame, something deeper had taken root, and when it grew too strong to ignore, soldiers began to write home. The letters arrived in mailboxes across America, from Iowa farmhouses to Brooklyn apartments, from Texas ranches to Oregon fishing towns. Mothers opened them with familiar anticipation, expecting news of their son's health, their duties, their hopes of coming home soon. Instead, they found confessions that shattered the distance between war and peace. "Dear Mom," one letter began, the handwriting careful, deliberate. "I know this will be hard for you to understand. I know you'll be angry. But I've met someone. Her name is Ilse. She's German." The mother, a woman named Dorothy from Kansas, read the words 3 times before they registered. German, the enemy, the people who had started the war, who had killed American boys, who had stood behind Hitler. Her son wanted to marry one of them. Dorothy's hands trembled as she set the letter down. She thought of her neighbor's son, killed at Normandy. She thought of the newsreels she had seen, the concentration camps, the horrors. And now her boy, her James, was telling her he loved a German woman. She did not write back for 2 weeks. When she finally did, her response was brief, cold. "I raised you better than this." James was not alone. Across Germany, thousands of American soldiers were making the same decision, facing the same reckoning. Some wrote to parents, seeking approval they knew would not come. Others wrote to siblings, hoping for understanding. A few wrote to friends, testing the waters before daring to tell their families. The responses varied, but most carried the same themes. Shock, disappointment, anger. How could you, after everything they've done? A corporal named William wrote to his father, a World War I veteran who had fought Germans in the trenches of France. "Dad, I know you'll think I've lost my mind, but she's not what you think. Her name is Annalisa. She's a nurse. She lost her brother in the war, just like we lost Uncle Frank. She's not a Nazi. She's just trying to survive." His father's reply came a month later, a single sentence. "You've dishonored this family." The letters from the women themselves, when they were included, often made things worse. Written in broken English, carefully composed, they tried to explain themselves, to humanize the choice. "Dear Mrs. Thompson, my name is Greta. Your son has told me much about you. I hope one day to meet you. I am not your enemy. I wish only for peace." But the words, sincere as they were, could not bridge the chasm. To the mothers reading them, these were still the daughters of the Third Reich, still complicit, still unforgivable. Some families refused to respond at all. Letters went unanswered. Soldiers waited weeks, then months, for acknowledgement that never came. The silence was its own verdict. A private named Charles wrote 5 letters to his mother in Philadelphia before giving up. He married his German fiancée, a woman named Liesel, in a quiet ceremony in Munich. No family attended, no congratulations arrived. He kept writing anyway, sending photographs, hoping she would soften. She never did. But not all families reacted with rejection. A few, a small but significant few, chose understanding over anger. A sergeant named Robert wrote to his younger sister in Ohio, explaining that he had fallen in love with a woman named Helga, a schoolteacher who had lost everything in the bombing of Dresden. His sister, Emily, wrote back, "I don't understand it, Rob. But you're my brother. If she makes you happy, then I'll try. It was not acceptance, not yet. But it was a crack in the door. The soldiers also faced judgment from their own ranks. Word spread in barracks when someone announced plans to marry a German woman. Some men offered congratulations, clapping shoulders, wishing luck. Others turned cold, muttering about traitors, about men who had forgotten what they were fighting for. A lieutenant named Paul found himself ostracized by fellow officers after announcing his engagement to Anneliese, the civil engineer he had worked with in Berlin. They stopped inviting him to card games, avoided him in the mess hall. One captain told him bluntly, "You're making a mistake. She's using you to get to America." The accusation stung because it was not entirely without merit. For many German women, marriage to an American soldier was, undeniably, a path to survival, to food, to safety, to escape. But survival and love were not mutually exclusive. A woman could marry for security and still come to love the man who offered it. A soldier could understand the pragmatism of the arrangement and still find genuine connection. The truth was complex, layered, resistant to easy judgment. As 1945 turned into 1946, the letters kept coming. And slowly, grudgingly, some families began to soften. A mother in Kentucky wrote to her son, "I still don't like it, but if you're determined, then bring her home. I'll try to be kind." It was not a warm welcome, but it was something. The letters had been written, the decisions had been made. Now came the weddings. In September 1946, the fraternization ban was officially lifted. The policy shift was pragmatic, not sentimental. Military leadership had recognized what soldiers on the ground already knew. The order was unenforceable. Thousands of relationships had formed despite the threat of punishment. Court-martials had not stopped them. Public shaming had not deterred them. The American military, facing the reality of its own troops, relented. Soldiers could now legally marry German women, though the bureaucratic obstacles remained formidable. The ceremonies took place in settings that reflected the fractured world around them. Some couples wed in makeshift chapels inside requisitioned buildings, military chaplains presiding over vows spoken in 2 languages. Others married in bombed-out churches, walls open to the sky, sunlight streaming through shattered stained glass. A few exchanged vows in occupation offices, signing papers witnessed by clerks and officers who stamped documents with the detached efficiency of bureaucracy. In Frankfurt, a soldier named John married Greta, the clerk he had met over paperwork in the motor pool. The ceremony was held in a small Lutheran church that had survived the bombing, though its roof bore scars. Greta wore a dress borrowed from a neighbor, altered to fit her thin frame. John wore his dress uniform, polished boots, a nervous smile. No family attended from either side. His parents had refused to acknowledge the marriage. Her mother had disowned her. The only witnesses were 2 fellow soldiers and a German woman Greta had worked with. The chaplain read the vows. They exchanged simple gold bands purchased from a street vendor. When the chaplain pronounced them married, John kissed his bride gently, and Greta wept, not from joy alone, but from relief. She had a future now. She had a name that might protect her. In Munich, Michael married Liesel in a quiet civil ceremony at the American military government office. There was no reception, no celebration. They signed the papers, shook hands with the officiant, and walked out into the cold November air as husband and wife. Liesel carried a small bouquet of wild flowers Michael had picked that morning. It was not the wedding she had imagined as a girl before the war, before everything collapsed, but it was real, and it was hers. Not every marriage was motivated by love. Some were transactions, clear-eyed agreements born of necessity. A German woman might marry an American soldier because it offered escape, access to food, a ticket to America. A soldier might marry because he was lonely, because he wanted companionship, because the woman was kind and he saw no reason not to. These marriages were no less valid, though they carried a fragility that time would test. Some would endure, others would crumble within years, the foundations too pragmatic to bear the weight of a shared life. The paperwork required for a German war bride to enter the United States was staggering. Applications, affidavits, background checks, medical examinations, security clearances. The women had to prove they were not Nazi party members, though many had been, at least nominally, because membership had been compulsory for certain jobs. American officials scrutinized every detail, searching for disqualifying affiliations. Some women lied, others omitted inconvenient truths. A few were denied entry, their pasts too entangled with the regime. Those rejections devastated families before they had even begun. A soldier named Paul faced this nightmare when officials discovered that Annalisa, the civil engineer he had married, had been a member of the Nazi Party's engineering guild. It had been required for her to work. She had never attended rallies, never expressed support for the ideology, but the record existed. Paul fought the decision for months, writing letters, appealing to superiors, arguing that she had been a professional, not a zealot. Eventually, after intervention from a sympathetic colonel, her application was approved. But the delay had cost them nearly a year of uncertainty, of wondering if their marriage would survive the bureaucracy designed to keep them apart. Even after approval, the journey was not immediate. Shipping space was limited. Tens of thousands of German women waited for passage to America, living in limbo, married but separated, unsure when they would see their husbands again. Some soldiers returned to the United States first, their enlistments ending, promising to send for their wives as soon as possible. The separations stretched weeks into months. Letters became lifelines, carrying promises, reassurances, fears that neither dared speak aloud. In 1947, the first large groups of German war brides began boarding ships bound for the United States. They traveled on converted troop transports, the same vessels that had carried soldiers to war, now carrying women to new lives. They stood on decks as the coast of Germany disappeared behind them, some crying, others silent, all of them aware that they were leaving everything they had known for a country that might never accept them. The ocean crossing took weeks. The women shared cramped quarters, told stories, compared fears. What would America be like? Would their husbands' families welcome them? Could they ever truly belong? The ships docked in New York Harbor, and the German war brides stepped onto American soil carrying suitcases, children, and the weight of a label they could never fully shed. For some, the arrival was marked by reunion. Husbands waited at the pier, scanning the crowds of disembarking women, searching for familiar faces. When they found each other, there were embraces, tears, relief that the long separation had finally ended. But the joy was tempered by uncertainty. The women looked around at a country they had only imagined, gleaming buildings, bustling streets, a land untouched by bombs. It was overwhelming. It was alien. And it was now home. Greta arrived in New York in the spring of 1948, clutching the hand of her young daughter from a previous marriage. John met her at the dock, smiling, confident, promising her that everything would be fine. They took a train to Kansas, where his family waited. The journey stretched across landscapes Greta had never seen, endless fields, small towns, open skies. She pressed her face to the window, trying to comprehend the scale of it all. Germany had been rubble and ruin. America seemed infinite. When they arrived at John's family home, his mother stood on the porch, arms crossed, face unreadable. Greta stepped out of the car, smoothing her dress, her daughter hiding behind her skirt. John made the introductions. His mother nodded stiffly, said nothing, and turned back into the house. Greta followed, heart pounding. The first meal was silent, forks scraping plates, no one meeting anyone's eyes. That night, Greta lay awake in the guest room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the American countryside, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. The reception varied across the country, shaped by geography, community, and the temperament of the families involved. In small towns, where everyone knew everyone, the arrival of a German war bride was an event, sometimes met with curiosity, sometimes with hostility. Women whispered in grocery stores, men stared openly, children parroting their parents, called the newcomers names they did not understand but repeated anyway. Liesel arrived in a small town in Wisconsin where Michael's family ran a dairy farm. His father, a stern man of few words, greeted her with a handshake and nothing more. His mother was kinder, offering a hesitant smile, gesturing toward the kitchen. Liesel spoke almost no English, but she understood the language of work. She helped with meals, cleaned, tended to chores without being asked. She did not complain. She did not ask for special treatment. Slowly, over months, the family softened. Michael's mother began teaching her English, correcting her gently, laughing when Liesel mispronounced words. The father, watching her work, remarked one evening, "She's tougher than she looks." It was not affection, but it was respect. In cities, the German war brides often found anonymity easier to navigate. In New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, they could blend into immigrant communities, find others who spoke their language, build lives without constant scrutiny. Annalise and Paul settled in Brooklyn, where she found work as a draftsman for a construction firm. Her English improved quickly. She made friends with other war brides, women who understood the peculiar loneliness of being both married and exiled. They met in cafes, shared recipes, complained about American customs they found baffling. These gatherings became sanctuaries, places where they did not have to explain themselves, where their accents were not marks of shame. But not all stories ended in acceptance. Some marriages collapsed under the weight of cultural difference, isolation, and unmet expectations. A soldier who had seemed kind in Germany became distant, even cruel, in America. A woman who had married for survival found herself trapped in a loveless arrangement with no way out. Divorce carried stigma, and for a German war bride, it meant losing not just a husband, but a country. Some endured, others fled, finding work, finding new communities, rebuilding lives from the wreckage of failed promises. The children born to these marriages grew up straddling two worlds. They were American by birth, but their mothers spoke German at home, cooked German food, sang German lullabies. In school, the children learned quickly not to mention their mother's origins. Being German, even a decade after the war, carried baggage. Some children anglicized their names, hid their heritage, distanced themselves from their mother's pasts. Others embraced it, proud of their dual identity, refusing to be ashamed. By 1950, over 20,000 German war brides had made the journey to America. They had crossed an ocean, learned a new language, navigated a society that viewed them with suspicion. Some thrived, others struggled. But all of them carried the same truth. They had married the enemy, and in doing so had become something neither German nor fully American, but something in between. Women who had chosen love or survival or hope in a world that had offered them so little of any of it. The fraternization ban had failed, the military order had crumbled, and in its place, families had formed, children had been born, lives had intertwined in ways no general could have predicted. The war had ended, but its echoes would sound for generations.